checks, they can't just be kind of let loose on our, on the runways, and that is what's taking time. And aviation bosses have been saying that those background checks need to be done quicker.
Okay. All right, Sarah, thanks for that. We'll be going back throughout the programme to it was quite a useful thing on the BBC website about what your rights are.
Airport say they've taken on 2,000
rights to cancel the BBC.
January.
That's some interesting information.
How many of them are actually functioning and how many just taken on?
Ofcom have got a new report out saying that which the focus of the safety of women and girls has turned online. The Ofcom report said women were more likely to come across harmful content or trolling and were experiencing greater distress from it. Zoe Kleiman is our technology editor. Good morning, Zoe, who's in the studio on this. Tell us a bit more about what Ofcom is.
I think it sort of backs up what we've already heard, isn't it? That women are far more likely to get trips into online. Social media companies in check, and for this to become a priority for Ofcom means it's going to be taken a lot more seriously.
Are they suggesting remedies to this, what the firm should actually be doing?
Well, it's going to have very big powers. I mean, first of all, it's going to be able to hit these companies where it hurts in their pockets. The fines that it's going to be able to issue are enormous. It also says it wants to be able to hold executives personally responsible. The onus is very much on removing this content as quickly as possible. That's going to be the path that Ofcom will take once the online harms bill gets.
So they basically say you regulate yourselves if it doesn't work, or we will inform you if you don't self-police. Is that
essentially? And the tech companies aren't entirely unhappy about that, because let's be honest, this regulation issue has gone on for years and years, and they've never really quite managed to self-regulate. So now I think it's time for another regulator to come in. And another really interesting snapshot of the UK's use of the internet, how long we're spending online. 4 hours a day now. 3 of those hours on our phone. The apps we're using most all belong to the Facebook owner Meta. They're Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Messenger. We're spending about 45 minutes a day on those platforms.
All right, well, thank you, Sarah. We'll be speaking to the Chief Executive of Ofcom at 10 to 8. Thank you.
Time now is 18 minutes to 7. Let's take a quick look at the morning front pages captured in the headlines about Boris Johnson. PM phoning Tory MPs to save his job is the headline in the Eye. Boris may be toast, is how the Metro puts it. The Daily Mail, which is very firmly backing Boris, has the headline Rebels Without a Clue, quoting an unnamed cabinet source who says the rebels don't have a plan apart from dripping out the names of people who are unhappy in public. The Times probably has the most significant news story when it reports that the ethics chief threatened to resign over number 10 parties. The story first alluded to in the Mirror, but the Times has been told, it says that Lord Geit threatened to quit during a discussion with the Prime Minister yesterday morning unless he, Boris Johnson that is, issued a public explanation about his conduct. He believed it was not a breach of the Ministerial Code. And finally on this, the Telegraph has a fascinating analysis of the numbers, and the people really conclude, if I just reach for it, that there is no pattern to it. The most startling aspect, it says, of the Tory rebellion is it touches almost every aspect of the parliamentary party. Just one example, the rebels count 17 Leave supporters and 13 rebels.
Quite an important story in the Financial Times saying that Lloyd's of London, the big insurance market, is going to withdraw insurance on Russian ships carrying Russian oil, which could have quite big consequences for Moscow's exports. It's an agreement between the UK and the EU. Lloyd's of London is saying it's refusing to comment about it in the FT, but people briefed on the plans said an announcement was imminent on Britain banning its insurers from carrying ships carrying Russian oil. And it's a big story in the Times. We're just talking to Zoe Kleiman about aviation bosses. Talking to Sarah Rogers about aviation bosses in crisis talks with ministers over access and tax revenues to help them to recruit more staff quickly and end the airport chaos. The Times has learned, and as we were just discussing with Sarah, one of the big problems is recruiting enough people to make up for the backlog of all the people who left the industry during the COVID restrictions.
It is now 16 minutes to 7. GPs and their staff are not just struggling to cope with the huge backlog of cases from the pandemic, they are increasingly facing threats and actual violence from their patients. That's the conclusion of research carried out by the British Medical Association, which on by one GP in Fleetwood in Lancashire, Dr. Adam Janjua. Good morning to you. Oh, we're going to be speaking to him, sorry, forgive me, let's turn instead, my apologies, to the story about Lord Guy we were just talking about in the newspapers. We'll come to that story, which is front page of the Guardian, on doctors and violence in a few minutes' time. In language worthy of Sir Humphrey and Yes Minister, Lord Guy, the Prime Minister's independent standards chief, says there is, quote, a legitimate question over whether the Prime Minister broke the Ministerial code after getting fined for Partygate. He appears to have threatened to resign, and Boris Johnson didn't explain why he judged himself to have stuck to the Ministerial code. Let's try and translate all this into something approaching fluent human with a programme director at the Institute for Government who studies these things. Alex Thomas joins us on the line. Morning to you.
Good morning, Nick.
If we may, let's go back right to basics. What is the point of a Ministerial code?
Yes, I'll do my best on the plain English stuff. The point of the Ministerial Code is to provide some sort of guidance for the standards of ethical and related behaviour that ministers should adhere to. It would normally be applied to other ministers, not the Prime Minister, and then the Prime Minister is the ultimate judge of the Ministerial Code. One of the reasons why you might think that the system has started to look a little bit fragile over the course of the last year or two is that the code, people are raising questions about the code in terms of the behaviour of the Prime Minister, who is then judge and jury on his own behalf.
Yeah, he is judge and jury because this man, Lord Guy, is an advisor. He is not, as it were, the Prime Minister's boss. He can't hire and fire. For not many people say, let me go down to
Home Office is an advisor, and that was a point that was reinforced in some of the changes to the Ministerial Code that were announced at the end of last week, when the Prime Minister, through the statement that he put out alongside those changes and his forward to the Ministerial Code, sort of reasserted his primacy in terms of deciding these sorts of ethical questions.
Well, let's turn then to what Lord Guy did say, and it was confusing in part because there were all sorts of references to a Prime Minister rather than the Prime Minister. Complicated language. What is your translation of what he was telling us yesterday?
So I think what he was saying is that there, goodness knows, we're investigated out in the wrong sense of the Partygate stuff, but there have been the police investigation into whether the Prime Minister and others broke the law on the code restrictions and the rights in Downing Street, and there's been the Sue Gray investigation about the sort of overall conduct and culture. What Christopher Guy was saying was there's a gap in this about the Ministerial Code, and nobody is holding the Prime Minister to account for his adherence to the Ministerial Code. So what he seems to be saying is that he communicated to the Prime Minister exactly how and whether the message got through is at issue. But he communicated to the Prime Minister saying, you need to provide me with reassurance that you didn't breach the Ministerial Code. It seems like, whether because the message didn't get through, or whether because the Prime Minister chose to ignore it, the Prime Minister never did that, which is causing Christopher Guy the angst that we saw in his somewhat circumlocutory language in the opposition last night.
And angst, briefly summed up, if you would, saying I'd look ridiculous if we didn't get this right.
Yes, and he sort of says the Ministerial Code itself and the whole system of ethics overseeing ministers and the Prime Minister look ridiculous. Some might say we've already gone beyond that point. I think what we're also seeing here is a bit of a tussle internally and externally between those who consider it their job to provide some sort of framework for the ethical oversight of the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister himself. So what actually seems really interesting, reading between the lines of some of the documentation that we've got, is how inside government Christopher Guy and others are trying to assert themselves with the Prime Minister, and how he's pushing back, and that's sort of spilling out into the internet now.
Alex Thomas, thank you very much. Fluent human indeed there from the Institute.
The future of science research in the UK is at a crossroads as its membership of the EU-wide Horizon programme, which provides tens of billions in research funding, hangs swings in the balance. Universities have called for an urgent resolution to the issue and have written to the Vice President of the European Commission, Maros Šefčovič, saying the situation is at a precedent. Vivian Stern is Director of Universities UK International, is on the line. Good morning to you. I'll ask you what you said to Mr Šefčovič in a minute. What would be the impact, in your assessment, of the UK leaving the Horizon Programme?
Well, I think it would really be a bit of a tragedy. I mean, it's something that's in our interest in the UK, but it's in the interests of our European colleagues, and I think also generally it's in the global interest that scientists can work together.
The Irish ferry is sailing
This was part
from
of the
Dover to Calais.
Yes, I don't know what the Irish ferries are. I've never heard of them.
Horizon Programme. So where
Book
is the
our
blockage
new Dover to Calais route
arisen,
today.
and whose fault is it?
Well, so as you
Now
say,
saving
the
from
trade
Dover.
cooperation agreement, both the UK and the EU agreed that they wanted this thing. They wanted an agreement that the UK could carry on being part of.
Someone
as
says,
Europe.
travelling with you week on
And
Thursday,
there's
looking
nothing to
forward
stop
to
that
see how
agreement
you
being signed tomorrow,
air.
as far as I can see. It's completely independent of other aspects of the trade and cooperation agreement. So the hold-up is entirely political. It's that because there's this ongoing dispute over the Northern Ireland Protocol, the Commission is simply saying they won't progress the agreement at this time, and it's as simple as that. And I think what our argument is fundamentally just separating these two things. This has nothing to do with the Northern Ireland Protocol. We both want it. Why on earth would you sacrifice something that's in everybody's interests for political reasons?
And is the delay in getting this sorted, is it already having a corrosive effect on recruitment, research programmes, what's happening at the moment?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, it's eroded the confidence of people both in the UK and in other universities in Europe and actually beyond Europe, that they can put in bids together to work together. I was reading yesterday about a project involving lots of universities and specialists across Europe who focus on childhood cancers. And that's one of those topics where there may only be 20 cases a year of a particular childhood cancer. It can be really, really difficult to build an understanding of a disease if you have very small numbers of cases. And the only way to really get a clear understanding is to work with a very, very large population. And I was reading yesterday that this particular consortium, the 3 UK participants, have been kicked out of it, and that's just daft.
If we do drop it, can't we just use the funding that we would have sent to the programme into the pot which Horizon draws from and spend that on UK research? Or is what you're saying the whole is greater than the sum of its individual parts?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. We will, I mean, the UK government has been completely clear, they will use the budget that we should be contributing to Horizon, which is about £15 billion over the course of the next 7 years, to come up with a domestic alternative. And the reason we wrote the letter to Maros Šefčovič is to point out that those plans are now really well advanced. I mean, we've seen them, we know that we're in the kind of final stages, I think, before those plans are put into action. It's a really big amount of money, but I think the reason for our distress over this is that you cannot just fix this problem with money. We've got a platform which enables scientists right across the world, actually, not just across Europe, but right across the world, to work together at a huge scale. And it's very, very hard to replicate that at a domestic level. Now, we could do great things with 15 billion, there's no question about it, and the plans the UK government's come forward with, I think, look pretty good. But it's still a tragedy if it stops us working together in the way that we have been doing on these really, really big challenges.
Vivian Stern, Director of Universities UK International. Thank you.
It is 7 minutes to 7. Now we do turn to GPs and the threat that their staff face from violent patients and from patients threatening to carry out violence if they don't get their way. That's the conclusion of research in the British Medical Journal. We can join the GP and for you what I mentioned a minute or two ago, Dr. Adam Janjua. Morning to you, Dr. Janjua.
Morning.
Have you faced these sorts of threats, the sort of violence that's set out in this report?
Sadly, I have, Nick. I've been a GP now for 13 years and worked in the NHS for 17, and I've never seen a situation like this before. It's unprecedented.
What sort of things do you face?
Well, we face a myriad of things, threats of violence. I've been shoved in the chest, I've been threatened to be stabbed when I least expect it, and that's to quote the patient, never thankfully materialized. The staff are constantly facing down demeaning, derogatory comments by angry patients. We're seeing intimidation, social media abuse, the list is endless.
But these threats, serious threats of violence, come from people who are in good mental health. This is not a reflection of their health.
Well, I'm cautious to say that I don't think that even if you do have mental health problems, unless you have severe ones, and I can guarantee you that the stories I've heard and the things I've experienced myself have come from relatively sane people, yes.
Why do you think it's happening now and it didn't happen when you first became a GP?